Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today is Adam Taylor. Adam is a retired 9/11 truth activist. He used to be very active in the 9/11 truth movement, the movement that advocates for a new investigation of the collapses of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11 because they think that it was from something other than the impacts and the fires. They think it was some kind of controlled demolition or something else. Adam actually got into 9/11 activism very young. He started when he was just 16 years old. And he did a lot of it. He made a lot of videos and he wrote a lot of blog posts, and he was basically fully into it until a couple of years ago when he took a break from the movement on the advice of a debunker. And after that, he retired. His story is very interesting. Here he is, Adam. Adam, welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you and great to be here.
I originally contacted you like 2 years ago. I was looking for people to interview a few days ago, and I was going through various posts, and your name came up, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a great guy. And so I looked you up on Facebook, and I thought I'll send you a message on Facebook, and I opened up the Facebook Messenger, and there was my message to you from 2 years ago, saying, and you saying like, give me a nudge if, remind me next week or something like that. And we never actually got back together. But now, here we are, 2 years later.
Yeah.
And it was like 2 years ago that you wrote your essay, Why 10 Years, At Least for Me, Is Enough, which was you kind of talking about how you were moving away from 9/11 activism. Could you let's start at the beginning, 9/11 itself. What do you remember of the day itself?
Well, I was 10 when it happened, and I was in school. I think like a lot of, like kids all across the country, they were just, going to school that day thinking it'd be a normal day. And I didn't actually see any footage from that day. They didn't have any TVs in the classroom. But, we all kept hearing, like, whispers and rumors about it. Like, eventually it got to everybody in my class that they said a plane hit the Twin Towers. And in my mind, I think like a lot of people, it was maybe an accident, that somebody had accidentally hit into the towers. Mm-hmm. But, throughout the day, it was becoming clear that wasn't the case. And when I got home that day, my dad kind of sat me down and explained to me what happened, that, this was a terrorist attack. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. And, to my 10-year-old mind, that seemed like a completely, it was totally alien to me, the idea that people could do something like that.
Yeah.
Over the years, I learned to accept that was, something people were capable of doing.
Do you remember how your dad acted at the time? Like, did he seem scared, or was he trying to, protect you from that type of feeling, do you think?
Thinking back, I think he was certainly shaken like everybody else, but I feel like he, tried to talk to me about it in the best way that he could and try to, handle it as calmly and appropriately as he could. And I think he did, honestly. I had to kind of absorb what that day meant over a gradual amount of time. I didn't take it all in at once, which I think was probably good for somebody like me at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I first heard about it when I was on my way to work, because I'm in California. So I just got up and was driving to work, and I turned the radio on, and I thought I was listening to some kind of play on the radio, like a drama. Because it just seemed so amazing. They were talking about bombing Washington and things like that, and the guy sounded hysteric, the guy they were talking to. And then I carried on. Eventually figured it out. I called my wife, and I had to I went to work, and it was a very, very bizarre day, day for everybody. But I can only imagine being 10 years old. It must be quite different. I was about 30 something at the time. So you say you heard talk of conspiracy theories after that. Did you give it much thought, between now and the when you first saw this documentary on the History Channel? Like before that, though, were you aware of the 9/11 conspiracy theories?
Yeah, I want to say the first time I ever heard about it was when they released the first images of the Pentagon strike. I
Mm.
think when they released those images, that was on the news, and I think even then there was already talk about it being a missile. And I think I remember even looking at it thinking, well, I don't think it's a missile, but I'll just say I certainly can't see a plane in those images. But I didn't give
Yeah.
it much thought. And you hear, just being on the internet, you're inevitably going to hear talk about that here and there. There was talk about the towers being demolished, and at the time I was just pretty incredulous to the whole thing. I just didn't give it much leeway. I figured, all right, maybe the government knows more about it than they're telling us, which I think is likely one way or the other, but I didn't think there was anything to these conspiracy theories. And then in late 2007, like you said, I saw just randomly going through TV, I
Mhm.
saw this documentary on the History Channel called 9/11 Conspiracies, Fact or Fiction. And I thought I'd give it a watch because I figured, well, all right, I've been hearing about these theories, but I never actually like looked at them and seen, really what they're all about. So I'll take a look. And so I came at this as a total like outsider. I didn't have any kind of firm belief one way or the other. And the thing the documentary really did is that it really kind of opened my eyes to, first of all, the amount of suspicion there was, like just how many people really believed this, because I didn't really know there was like a whole movement behind this. But it also showed me just like how many weird anomalies people had found. Like the scale of it was something I just didn't appreciate at the time. And after the documentary was over, I kind of thought, this seems more serious than I thought. Maybe I actually should look into this. So I started looking into it. I watched, movies like Loose Change, like people had done, and I went to certain 9/11 sites, like Jim Hoffman's 9/11 research site was one of the first
Mhm.
ones I found. And from there, I just started, researching it and became more and more convinced the more I found.
Would you say there was like some kind of tipping point at all? Like, was there one particular piece of evidence that you think really kind of pushed you over the edge?
I don't know if there was any one particular piece of evidence. I think a lot of it is very compelling looking at it, and I know you and I will disagree on this, of course,
Yeah.
which is fine. Um, but, it seemed cumulatively the evidence was, you know, pretty overwhelming as far as I could tell. Just looking at the way the towers fell, a lot of the evidence for foreknowledge I looked into as well. A lot of it just seemed like cumulatively, it doesn't seem like the official narrative we've been given can possibly be true. And I'll make it clear that there's a lot of theories about 9/11 that I don't believe in, and
Hmm.
we can go into that too. I've had to. That's been a big part of what I've been doing over the years is trying to like weed out, the good theories from the bad theories. Because there's a lot of good ones out there. There's a lot of really bad ones out there, and the problem I had, and partly why I kind of retired from the truth movement, is because it's all kind of mixed up, and nobody seems like they've really gone through the trouble of like clearing out all the bad stuff and just focusing on the good stuff. Really, even in some of the most comprehensive investigators in the truth movement, I don't know that I've totally seen that yet.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something like I feel like I'm a kind of a debunker person, and I think that the official story, at least of the collapses of the buildings and the impacts of the planes and the Pentagon and the Shanksville, I feel that those are pretty likely to be what happened. And so I'm coming at it from kind of different position to you, but I still think that clearing away all these false conspiracies is the ultimate goal. Essentially, like you want to try to figure out what is the truth, what did actually happen, and if there
Mhm.
was some bad stuff going down on 9/11 from our own government, or if there was, even if it's just to the level of there was some incompetence or some lapses, or maybe some deliberate acts that happened around that time. Like all this other stuff is kind of a distraction from it. And I know you kind of feel that about things like a cruise missile hitting the Pentagon. You think that's a distraction.
Yeah, pretty much any kind of no planar theories that are out there, I think have no basis to them, and I'm honestly like very sick of them. I've had lots of discussions with World Trade Center no planers, Pentagon no planers, and it's really frustrating to somebody like me, and was over the years, because it makes my job so much harder. Because when I would talk to people about what I consider to be good evidence, some people would actually bring up stuff about the Pentagon, or no plane crashing into the towers, or even in Shanksville. And so I'd have to kind of explain to them, no, I don't believe in that, and here's why you shouldn't either. So it's like I have to do like double the work pretty much. So it makes my job so much harder, and that's the kind of stuff that really bugs me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if everybody was on the same page, or at least closer. You're on the same page, which doesn't mean they have the exact same opinions, but they're talking about the same things. If someone's talking about the planes being holograms, then they're not really going to be that interested in your evidence for I don't know, whatever, remote control planes or things like that. Yeah. So you said you watched Loose Change. That was one of the ones you watched next. It's interesting. You said that you wouldn't recommend the early editions of Loose Change. This is this quite popular documentary back in the mid-2000s. It's had several editions since then, and the first ones were kind of had a whole bunch of errors. But I guess people still, a lot of people mention Loose Change. Was it something that influenced you a lot at the time?
Well, the reason I went to that is because that was kind of the main film they focused on in the History Channel documentary. They talked about that one so much, and I thought, well, they talked about this documentary so much, I might as well go and watch it. And I don't think the third edition was out yet. I think when I watched it, it was still just the second edition that was out. And at the time, I thought it was very impressive. There was a lot of stuff in it that wasn't mentioned in the documentary, stuff that they, could have brought up. It's just what I've learned now. I wouldn't recommend the second edition, because I just think there's too much in it that's, it's been a constant thing for me. I tend to be very picky about which 9/11 films I recommend to people, like truth movement films, because sometimes if there's like stuff in it that's too much false info, I just can't do it. It's like if I had my way with the third edition, for example. The third edition, I think, is still the best one, because they don't really go with the idea a plane didn't hit the Pentagon. They kind of hint at it. Like, if it was up to me, I would just say in the film, no, a plane most likely did hit, and we should just forget about the no plane stuff. But, kind of a midway to that, I guess I'm okay with.
Yeah.
But yeah, Loose Change was one of the early films I saw, like a lot of people. And I've seen a lot of other, truth movement films that are pretty good. I think 9/11 Press for Truth is really good. People should definitely watch that one. A lot of really good ones out there. But Loose Change, at least the first and second edition, I think people can skip. I think the third and the Final Coup edition that was put out too, I think are both pretty good, and will give people some pretty good information.
Yeah, I should probably watch them. I haven't. I saw it many, many years ago. I was probably watching something like the second or third edition. I can't remember exactly. But I should probably watch it to get up to date with what people are saying. So after Loose Change, you say you kind of found several useful 9/11 websites. So you mentioned three of them: 9/11 Research, 9/11 Truth, and 9/11 Blogger. What did you get from all these websites?
It was good that those were sort of the early ones I found, because just like with the movies, there's a lot of very bad 9/11 Truth websites out there too. In particular, Jim Hoffman's site, his 9/11 Research site, was the one I kind of found the most useful, just because of the setup of it. The fact that every page on that site, had like footnoted references, so it had, it sourced what it was saying, so I can go check it, and I liked that. I thought that was really handy, and it was set up in this very encyclopedic type way, so it was easy to navigate. It's like the presentation was very professional, and that already kind of told me this seemed like this was a good resource to go to. And 9/11 Truth and 9/11 Blogger, kind of more activist sites, but they seem to be, pretty responsible too. So early on, it was just a matter of trying to weed out what looked like, the responsible truth sites and the irresponsible ones. And there's a lot of irresponsible ones out there, and those are ones that I tend to avoid and not give any credence to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly quite a wide variety of websites. And then you kind of got into blogging yourself at this point with 911debunkers.blogspot.com, and you kind of like started making posts on that. And how did that come about?
Yeah, it was actually in 2009 when Loose Change Final Coup was coming out. It actually comes back to Loose Change again. They announced that they were releasing this new edition of Loose Change, and I was really excited about that because it looked really professionally made, and it was going to be up to date. So I thought, oh, that's great. So what I started doing was going to the Loose Change site and going on the Loose Change forum from time to time. I didn't ever sign up as a poster, but I would just kind of, peruse it from time to time to kind of keep up to date with what was going on. And on one thread that I can't find anymore, somebody posted a link to this website called 911debunkers.blogspot.com, which I had never heard of, but they said it was a site for, addressing debunkers, which I was interested in. So I thought, oh, okay, let's check that out. And I was really impressed with it as I was looking through it because the people there posting were really taking on what debunkers were saying in a pretty comprehensive way, and it really impressed me. And eventually, I got a hold of the main guy who ran it, my friend now, John Michael Talbot, and I've been making just little videos for YouTube about 9/11, and I contacted him and basically just said, hey, I like what you're doing. The site looks great. I'm making videos kind of addressing debunkers too. If you want to take a look at them. And he got back to me and looked at it, and he liked what I was doing too, and said, yeah, I'll post them at the site if that's okay. I said, sure. And eventually he asked me, do you want to write for the site? I thought, yeah, I could do that. I've never written for a website or a blog before, but I can give that a shot. And that was really kind of a big turning point in my, research into 9/11 and what I was doing as an activist, because I was basically, I think, at that point trying to find kind of my niche in the truth movement. And I think the Debunkers blog was absolutely my niche. I really feel like that's where I was supposed to be, because I think wrote some of my best stuff about that at that site. So I was really happy to find that, and meeting John Michael, I got to be involved in 9/11 activism far more than I could have been otherwise. So yeah, it was great finding that site and writing for there for so many years.
So you're writing for a blog that's addressing debunker claims. So do you think you prefer kind of doing that, addressing debunking, rather than trying to persuade people by just presenting the evidence? Do you see that as was it more fun, or do you think it was more effective to do things like that? Why do you think you preferred that?
Well, I think actually doing that was a good way to present evidence. I think that I did do that a lot in the post that I wrote. I think it accomplished two goals, actually. I think on the one hand, we could address the claims debunkers were making, and at the same time present the evidence that we felt was compelling. And a lot of good came out of that, I think. And just to be clear, it wasn't just debunkers that we were addressing on that blog. If you go on there, we've got tons of posts addressing truthers too, and claims that they've made that we felt weren't very good. So that's another thing about it. That was a really good way to, like I was saying before, weed out sort of the good evidence from the bad. So yeah, I mean, we took to task truthers, I'd say, just as much as debunkers. That's really what the point of the blog was. It was really about weeding out the bad evidence and the good evidence, the good arguments, the bad arguments, and I think doing it that way allowed us to do that pretty effectively.
Yeah, it's interesting. The site's called 9/11 Debunkers, and it's kind of not clear from the title whether it's about 9/11 debunkers or you are debunkers who talk about 9/11, because a lot of what you do essentially would be debunking. You'll be debunking the no plane things. You'd be debunking the Judy Woods stuff and other theories like that. So you are a debunker in a way, but just with a different perspective.
Yeah, and that's kind of related to a lot of people in the movement would say that the debunkers themselves are the conspiracy theorists because they believe the government's conspiracy.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like to get into the back and forth about who's the debunker, who's the conspiracy theorist. I like to just say we're all researchers looking into 9/11 and we just come to different conclusions. That's how I prefer to look at it.
So what do you think of, or what back then, what did you think of the debunkers, like the people who were writing posts, like trying to debunk 9/11 truth claims?
Well, I thought in some cases a lot of what they said was right. Like, I don't think everything every debunker said about 9/11 has been wrong. You know, I've had my mind changed plenty of times by arguments they presented. Um, I think that, you know, I may genuinely disagree with them about the conclusion, but, you know, I've learned from them, and I hope that to some degree they've learned from me too. I've actually seen debunkers say they think that I got some stuff right that I talked about. So, yeah, I don't have any ill will against any debunker. Like, one of the things that I've made clear is I've never seen the debunkers as the enemies of the truth movement. The only people that I consider to be the enemies or the bad guys in this whole situation are the people that actually carried out the attacks, whoever they are. They're indisputably the bad guys, the people that are the enemies here. But the debunkers, I really have just tried to look at them as other researchers who just came to a different conclusion about 9/11 than I have. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, what about the people who make claims that kind of everybody, you know, the debunkers and you agree are wrong, like the more extreme, the no plane people?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think of them as being the bad guys? I mean, they're obviously not the bad guys because they didn't do anything, but they're not helping.
Well, I think they are just very, very bad, very irresponsible researchers. That's kind of how I would phrase it. I do think that they did a lot of harm to the truth movement, potentially more harm than even debunkers have, just because a lot of these wacky theories that are out there, it's the kind of thing that, for one thing, the media preys upon when they want to try to discredit us. You know, they would point out, like, for example, there was, I think, a couple of, I think it was a BBC documentary, the Conspiracy Files. You know, they had like a big close up of a guy at Ground Zero with like a no planer shirt on, or in a National Geographic documentary, they had a close up of people holding up this big sign saying no planes at the towers. So I know that when these theories get brought up, the media oftentimes takes those and tries to like make it look like, you know, we're crazy. Like, they don't differentiate between the people who are promoting those theories, promoting other theories, and that bothers me. That frustrates me a lot. I wouldn't call them enemies. I would just call them very irresponsible. I call them irresponsible conspiracy theorists. I think there's a responsible way to be a conspiracy theorist and irresponsible ways to be conspiracy theorists, and it's just trying to figure out, you know, who's who in that sense.
Yeah, that's interesting what you say about the media, because it kind of bothers me as well. Like, I write about the chemtrail conspiracy theorist, and like everybody, every time it comes up in the media, people will say, "Oh, these people believe that we're being sprayed with mind-altering chemicals from the sky." When hardly any of the chemtrail people actually believe that. That's kind of like the no-plane version of the chemtrail theory. Like the most common thing of the chemtrail theory is that they think it's secretly trying to modify the climate. And so if when the media or other debunkers or the skeptics like start putting out these extreme versions as being the straw man to attack, then it really, you know, it hinders communication. It makes it hard for me to actually talk to people. You know, you've really got to figure out what the person you're talking to actually believes in, rather than addressing some kind of caricature that you imagine they all believe in. Another thing I found really interesting about your essay was your account of you going to New York in 2011, and for you it was like a very kind of almost like a powerful experience going to go there and meet fellow activists for the first time. So can you kind of tell us about what happened there?
Yeah, that was a big deal because, you know, for the vast majority of my work in the truth movement, I wasn't one of those people going out with like groups of people in the black shirts, like, you know, demonstrating out on the street. Like, pretty much I was doing this all on my own for the most part. Like, yes, working with people on the blog and writing posts, but as far as like going out and actually doing any kind of activist stuff, I was pretty much doing it all on my own. Like, I would you know, go to the store and buy, you know, reams of paper and ink from my printer to like make my own homemade pamphlets to try to hand out. Like, that's pretty much it. And then me, John Michael, and his wife, we went to New York in 2011 for the 10-year anniversary. And that was the first time I'd ever been to New York, for one thing, and the first time I'd been to Ground Zero for 9/11. And it was, yeah, part of it was a really powerful experience to be there, like with everybody, you know, demonstrating, calling for a new investigation. But the other aspect to it was there was a little sense of like, it didn't seem like the movement was going anywhere because, for one thing, the turnout was a lot smaller than I had seen in, you know, I had seen videos of like the ones from 2006 and 2007. There was like hundreds, if not thousands, of people at those, and this one there was like maybe 100, 200, something like that. It was a decent amount of people, but it wasn't anywhere near what they'd had in previous years. And for me, that was kind of a, you know, the first visual sign I'd seen that like the movement was really stagnating, like it was losing real momentum. And you know, I was even talking to people there who were still talking about really bad evidence, and that kind of filled me with more dread, where it felt like we weren't getting anywhere. So for me, like in my post, I talk about how, you know, people have said the movement kind of peaked in 2006, and that might be the case, you know, because that was technically the biggest turnout in 2006 for the 5-year anniversary. But for me, I would say that was probably when it peaked, because that was sort of the height of my truth or activism and how much I got involved. And after that, it just felt like the momentum was steadily declining more and more. So it was unfortunate, but I couldn't ignore the warning signs when they were there, pretty much.
So did things change for you after that because of that, when you saw that? Or was that just kind of something you identify in the past as being a point when things changed?
I mean, it changed in the sense that, like I myself personally had momentum up to that point. Like I had still a passion to do it, and I think after that is just when that passion started to steadily decline. Like that was the point where my momentum certainly was going down, just because I could see the momentum of the movement in total was going down. Like where I was kind of at that point was I sort of knew that maybe like the activism aspect of the movement had kind of been going down since 2006. Where I kind of had my hope set was in more of the academic aspect to it, because, you know, the scientists in the movement had been getting papers actually published in peer-reviewed journals at that point. And I was starting to think that, okay, maybe the activist, you know, side of it's not going to be the driving force, but it seemed like in the academic community we're making more progress, and maybe that's where we'll, you know, have our next wave of momentum. I feel like the academic aspect of it was sort of the second wave of the truth movement in a sense, and that's sort of where I had my hopes set. But even that didn't seem like it was going anywhere, because, you know, the active thermetic material paper that everybody, I assume, knows about, that was put out in 2009, that's like the closest that, you know, anyone had ever gotten to showing that there was actual explosives in the debris from Ground Zero. And then that didn't seem to be getting us anywhere to a new investigation. So, you know, seeing that even like the academic aspect of it wasn't getting us any closer to a new investigation, that was also a point where it felt like, you know, we weren't getting anywhere with it, that we weren't going to get a new investigation. You know, where I had my hopes set, even that wasn't working out. And so that was kind of a main turning point for me, too.
Why do you think that that the dust studies, these things where they found this supposedly active thermitic material in the dust, why do you think that didn't get more play in academia with people who are interested in this type of thing? We had there's a couple of studies, I can't remember exactly how many, but there was Dr. Jones did this one, Stephen Jones, and he did some tests and, you know, found some material which he thought was not thermite exactly, but active thermitic material. He was a bit strange about what it was exactly. And then there was a kind of a counter study by I can't remember his name, Millett.
James Millett.
Yeah. And then there was supposed to be another study after that, but it kind of never happened, and it just kind of petered out. Like nothing has really been done by it. But they still have this one, or, you know, a couple of studies from back then. Why do you think nobody in the entire world has really been interested in furthering this study?
Well, I'm not exactly sure about that. It's maybe more than I can say. I will say it's not that nobody's taken interest in it. I know that, some scientists have commented on it. As far as I know, James Millett is the only one that actually published a counter study. And his study, as far as I know, it's still online and freely available. It wasn't ever submitted for peer review. It was supposed to be, and just it never was. Um, I don't know if that had anything to do with kind of stagnating the interest in the paper. If people just heard there was a counter study that showed it was wrong, maybe that had something to do with it. Um, I don't know. I don't know why the academic community didn't take more notice of it. I wish they had. Maybe they did and just weren't convinced by it. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact is, there's the fact that there is currently no, peer-reviewed refutation of that paper. That is something that we can say. There was never any kind of discussion submitted of it. Like I said, the Millett paper wasn't ever peer-reviewed. So in that sense, the peer review of that paper, I think, does stand. That doesn't mean it's right. I know peer review doesn't mean that it absolutely is right. It's just that as far as I can tell, it's gone unchallenged as far as peer-reviewed standards go. But I don't know. I wish the academic community, and granted, we needed more than just that. We needed support of people with subpoena power to take notice of that too, and use that to try to get us into investigation.
Yeah, I think like perhaps more studies from I don't know, neutral parties might be a good start. It's
I
interesting.
agree.
You mentioned like peer review studies don't necessarily mean something is true, and this is true. And I think this is a mistake a lot of even like people who are scientific skeptics who pride themselves on being scientific. They're always saying like show me the peer reviewed studies, but there's peer reviewed studies that prove chemtrails exist. There's actually quite a few. There's about 10 different papers published by this one guy who somehow managed to publish all these papers on chemtrails, and they are peer reviewed in journals. And it doesn't necessarily mean something. You need multiple independent verifications of something rather than simple peer review. Peer review, in a lot of cases, just means people read the paper and see if there's any obvious mistakes that they can see personally. And I think the quality of peer review probably varies a lot. I'm not saying anything about Stephen Jones' paper specifically, but certainly for this chemtrail paper, the peer review was not very good at all. So you mentioned architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and that you were kind of disappointed by what they did. And this architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth is headed by Richard Gage, an architect. And he's collected a whole bunch of people who are either architects or engineers or various other people. And these are people who think that 9/11 was controlled demolition, essentially. And they've got this kind of authority, I guess, in that they're all architects and engineers. And they've got 3,000 people to sign a petition. But you say you were kind of dismayed by the activities of architects and engineers by 9/11 Truth. I mean, obviously you share goals. So what they did that dismayed you?
It kind of goes back to my thing about my hope was in sort of the academic aspect of 9/11, that I was really hoping, because we had so many experts that agreed with us, we'd be getting more detailed studies, published in, respectable scientific venues. Now, granted, a lot of that's been done. We actually have a lot of papers at this point published in peer-reviewed journals that either directly or indirectly support controlled demolition, for example. But I would have just liked to have seen a lot more of that. Like one of the things I say in my post is like, of like the 3,000 members they have, if just say 100 of them each published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal or submitted it to a peer-reviewed journal. I know that because of the taboo nature of 9/11, and especially with the towers, I can see why it'd be really hard to get those kind of papers published and accepted. But if just 100 did, if there was 100 papers published in like a different journal by these people, odds are at least a few of them would get accepted and would get, published, and that would get the attention of, more people in the academic community, in the engineering community. And some of that's been done. And there have been cases where people in the movement have tried to submit papers to science journals, and they have been rejected for kind of these weird reasons. Like the journals gave them these very odd excuses, like why they weren't going to publish them and why they weren't even going to review them. Like, it's not even that they reviewed them and found that they just were bad papers and they were rejecting them. It was that they said these weird things about, oh, this is outside the scope of the journal that you're trying to publish in, or, this or that. So just some kind of odd reasons, which I think supports this idea that because of the taboo nature of it, that some journals might be reluctant to even publish stuff like that. But like I said, because of just the numbers we have, if there was more of a, concentrated effort to get these things published, I think the odds are, we would get a lot. But, that just hasn't happened as much as I would like it to.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, up to the individuals to make that decision. But, from my perspective, that kind of seems like evidence that the case isn't that strong. Because if the case was a fairly strong case, wouldn't it be fairly straightforward to have hundreds of people writing papers explaining what the case was?
To an extent. Now, I will say that there is, as far as I know, currently some work to get that done. I am, like I said, retired from the movement for the most part, but I've got, friends on Facebook who are in the movement who post things about it. So I do keep up to date with what's going on. And from what I understand, there is somebody from Architects and Engineers who's actually going to be presenting a conference paper at an engineering conference, which that's great. I think part of the problem, too, is that maybe a lot of this is kind of like, a little late to the game. Like, I would, in terms of like presenting an engineering paper at a major conference, I would have much rather that happened, like in 2006 or 2007 rather than 2019. Like, I think it would have been much better. Because that's another reason why I feel like there's stagnation in the movement, is because the more the years go on, kind of the less interest people have in 9/11, and they have the mindset of, oh, that happened in the past, we need to move on from it. It seems like this is something that we kind of needed to get a new investigation into pretty quickly. Like, it's a little sooner than, the activities that are going on now. Like, we might be at that point where even if we did have evidence that would, be conclusive, that itself might not get us a new investigation because the public interest has just gone down so much that nobody wants to even take up this issue anymore.
But surely if there was some conclusive evidence, that would be very difficult to ignore. And
to a degree, I would say we're at that point where a lot of the evidence sort of, because of the years have gone on, is not, accessible to us anymore. Like, one example is, it'd be great to do more studies of like the dust from ground zero, to see what's there. But because so many years have gone by, obviously the wreckage has been cleared away. I don't know, because I'm not a chemist or an explosive expert, but a lot of even if there was explosive material there, it might have, kind of deteriorated at this point. Like, we may not even be able to detect it, even if we had like access to more dust samples. So that's the other thing too, is just like the, expiring of the evidence might be going on to an extent too, to where no matter what we want to look into, the evidence is just gone. We don't have access to it anymore and have no way of getting access to it. So I do think that as far as getting a new investigation, it's something that if it was going to happen, I think it needed to happen a lot sooner than later, basically.
Mm-hmm. There's some things that you personally, I think, consider to be fairly absolute evidence, like things like the speed at which the buildings collapsed. Mm. I don't know if you feel more strongly about the towers or Building 7, but wouldn't you personally say that that's conclusive evidence that it was not a fire and impact driven collapse?
Well, I would say that the rate of the collapses, and I do think that is indicative of demolition, probably more for Building 7 than for the towers, because, everybody knows Building 7 came down in free fall for 100 stories for a few seconds. So I do think that's pretty conclusive. But I would say that tentatively, like I personally have not seen a good explanation for that yet. Like I'll say it here. If you ask me, am I like 100% certain the towers were demolished? I would say no. I think it's very likely, but I'm certainly open to the notion that they weren't. I just haven't seen conclusive arguments or evidence to, convince me otherwise. But I certainly feel like I can have my mind changed.
But you would also, I guess, the flip side of that is that you haven't seen conclusive evidence that proves that it is, or has convinced you that it is. If you still,
Yeah, I have not seen a good explanation, for example, that explains how Building 7 could have come down, for example, in terms of how it collapsed at the rate it did and how the building itself behaved. Like, I'll just give one example real quick if I can.
Sure.
So, the explanation I've usually heard for why Building 7 collapsed as quickly as it did, for free fall and even after that, is because what we're seeing in the videos is just the outer shell of the building collapse, and that the interior is what collapsed first, and then what you had was basically the shell of the building. And that's basically what NIST says about the collapse. They say that you had this progressive collapse going across, where the interior collapsed first, and then you see the perimeter falling down. And that would explain why it collapsed as quickly as it did. But the problem I have with that is, if the interior is collapsing before the exterior, why don't we see, these large deformations in deformity in the shell itself as the interior is coming down? And that's a problem that not even just people in the truth movement have, even debunkers have had that. Dr. Frank Greening, for example, if you're familiar with him, he wrote a paper to NIST. It was feedback on their draft report for their Building 7 report. And he said that, yeah, the interior, is connected to the exterior by dozens of girders and beams, and we should have seen all this, deforming happening on the outside of it, but we don't see that. And then I hear people say, and I think it was even NIST who said this, and some debunkers, that, well, it's because, the outer shell was, sturdy and strong enough to not deform as the interior was coming down. But I hear that and think, but wait, you're also saying that the exterior was weak enough, then that's why it allowed it to collapse as quickly as it did. So it's like, you can't argue that the exterior was both strong and weak. You can't say that it was strong enough to avoid deforming as the interior was coming down, but also say it was weak enough that it allowed the building to collapse as quickly as it did, for 2.5 seconds in total free fall. So that's a bizarre contradiction that I don't see a good explanation for.
Right.
As far as why the building collapsed the way it did, like, it seemed like the building kept its shape pretty well, like, aside from the kink as it was collapsing. It seemed like it kept its shape pretty well as it was collapsing, and, I've seen that happen, and that's in buildings that have been brought down to demolition. I've seen demolitions where when the building comes down, it kind of keeps its shape for the most part, as it's collapsing. So that's one way that can happen, and that seems consistent with a demolition when I look at Building 7.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. But your description there of your objections to the argument, and I don't want to. I mean, it sounds like.
If you have a better explanation.
Yeah, no, it's. I don't really have a better explanation. My explanation is the same. It's that the exterior of the building is a moment resisting frame, which means that all the connections are bolted in all directions, so that nothing can bend no matter which way. Whereas the interior connections are only basically supporting connections. They support the vertical load of the building, and they support the floors on the shelves or the various connections that they have. So when the columns collapse in the middle of the building, that falls down, and the floors kind of pivot around the exterior connections, and then they kind of flop down. And the exterior connection, because it's moment resisting, because it's resisting turning forces, it doesn't twist inwards. Where the interior is collapsed because its strength has been removed, like the columns, the support strength. And then when it falls, it's kind of in a way like what they do with a controlled demolition, in that they blow out a number of sections of the building, and then the building will collapse from the bottom down. It falls into the bottom essentially. Except that what happened here was that the building kinked. The exterior of the building kinked at the bottom, and that kink kind of progressed all the way around, and the building just kind of fell more or less straight down because it had no supporting strength in it, which went dum 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 down the bottom. And that, it makes sense to me. But both of us, we just gave explanations of things, but they're only based on words. It's a verbal description. And you can say, oh, here's a description of what happens, but it doesn't make any sense that that would be strong enough, or it wouldn't be strong enough, or whatever. Or I'm saying it does make sense. So I mean, what you've really got to do is do the math and the physics. You've got to actually work it out. I don't think you're ever going to convince people based on these verbal descriptions.
Sure, and that's a fair point. I will just say I'm not sure people can find it. If people want to read Dr. Frank Greening's paper that he wrote as a critique of the NIST report, they can probably find it somewhere online. I probably reference it somewhere on my old blog. If people are interested and want to go to my old blog, I don't write there anymore, but it's adamtaylor42.blogspot.com, and they can find that if they can find all my writings on 9/11 if they would like to. They're so inclined to check it out. Like I said, I don't write there anymore, but I'm still pretty happy with what I wrote there, and can vouch for most of it. But I feel like some people have put forward these numbers that show that the building is really not collapsing in a consistent way. Like you're saying that the moment resisting of the structure, that itself would allow it to avoid deforming, but still allow it to collapse as quickly as it did.
Once it did actually lose its strength, because it has to reach a point of failure. And I think if the interior of the building was pulling in the walls, it would fail at that point. So it's kind of like you're standing on a soda can, and it's able to support your weight, right. But when you just push the wall in a little bit, and it collapses. It seems like essentially the same thing to me, except it's just right down at the bottom, and obviously there's issues of scale which change the equation. But essentially, I think that's what happened to the exterior of the building.
Yeah, I just find it hard to believe that all of that is going on inside the building, and for the most part, we see no, aside from some windows breaking, because we do see that. I find it hard to believe that you don't see any kind of deformities happening. I believe Dr. Greening said that what you should see is like the exterior actually kind of bowing as a result of that, which I think you can actually see in one of NIST's computer models, that there actually is, as the building comes down, this kind of bowing that happens at the top of it. So that would be consistent with that as well.
There's an interesting thing I saw on video, it's probably like a year ago, I noticed, and other people noticed it too, is that when the penthouse falls down, you can actually see like a wave go all the way down through the visible portion of the building, like the penthouse is falling from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, I've seen videos people have done where they kind of take a video and they like color enhance it so you can actually see the penthouse going all the way down to it. Yeah. So I've seen that too. So yeah, I think the penthouse, I don't see how it couldn't either. I'm sure it is going all the way down to the bottom of it.
But then you got other people like Tony Sambotti, who says that didn't happen and the penthouse just fell down a couple of floors because it wouldn't work.
Yeah, and I heard that from him too. And I thought at the time he had something there, but then I saw like videos people had done where they could show it. And his whole thing was, he was just saying that because you didn't see sunlight coming through the windows, you saw sunlight coming through the top portion where it had fallen, but you don't see it further down. So that's what he was basing that off of. And maybe he's wrong about that, but I don't think that's an irrational thing to conclude if you base it off something like that.
Now, we could probably go over the details endlessly, but
yeah,
let's kind of carry on with your kind of story here. Well, actually, you mentioned the University of Alaska study real quick. Do you know much about that? This is something, a study funded by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth to to demonstrate what might have been the cause of the collapse of Building 7?
Yeah, I've looked at that a little bit. I know they still have not published the final version of it, which is another thing that's kind of bugged me. I've given them a little bit more leeway on it just because I know this is a big project, and I also feel like people shouldn't be too harsh on that because when you look at how long it took NIST to get their Building 7 report out, that was a whole big thing too, that NIST kept setting dates for when they'd release it and then they didn't release it. And this is kind of the same case here. And I think they're supposed to, the next date of release they said is this September. I hope it gets released.
I think
I'd like to see it.
Around the anniversary again.
Yeah, so I hope that gets released. And I kind of have the same conclusion about that as I have about other aspects of the movement is if it gets done, great. But, until I see it, I'm not going to get my hopes up. It's very much a, show me the money kind of thing. Like I want to see the actual words on the page. I want to see this thing actually published out there. It looks promising, but I can't say for sure unless they actually put out a final version of it.
It will be very interesting because it is kind of putting numbers to the the discussion we just had there. Like could it possibly happen? So they did various tests. I kind of feel like Professor Halsey is a little bit biased towards the controlled demolition hypothesis, but we'll wait and see what the actual study itself shows.
That might be, and I think it's a good thing they're doing what NIST did, and it's going to be available for public comment that, regardless of whatever biases the researchers involved in it might have, at least everybody will get to, submit comments on it. Yeah. I'll read it when it comes out, and maybe even submit my own comments. We'll see.
Yeah, it was a bit disappointing that they started out with more promises of openness than they actually kind of ended up doing. I think it was like almost 3 years ago now they started it, and they had some videos of the two graduate students and Professor Halsey talking about their work, and then just nothing. It was like complete silence after that for the next 3 years. He did one presentation doing a summary, but they didn't really, I think, involve the community in the way that they said they were going to do at the start, which was a bit disappointing, but we'll read the report when it comes out.
Right.
So let's get to your kind of Ryan Mackey. He had a paper on analyzing the truth movement, and you obviously disagree with a lot of it, but there was one suggestion of his that you kind of took to heart, which was take a break.
Yes.
So what happened there?
Well, like I said, I read his paper, and, some of it I don't agree with. Some of it I thought, he made good points. And that was a good point because he put that paper out in 2011. I can't remember if it was before or after I went to Ground Zero, but, it was out around the same time that I was kind of having this feeling of, like I said, the stagnation in the truth movement, that the momentum was going down. It didn't seem like we were going to actually accomplish our goals and get an investigation. And I thought his suggestion about just walking away, taking a break from it, and just see how you feel about it was a good one. He's right in the paper when he says he suggests taking a month off from it, and he's right when he says, there's no harm in just taking a month off from it. And I did, and I took several months off, from time to time, and it was fine. I never had an issue with walking away from it for a bit or even coming back to it. It didn't really have much of I didn't feel like I was addicted, ooh, I have to get back into this. I can't stand to be away from this research. No, I felt fine, and I think it was good for me, in those periods of just stepping away and focusing on other things in my life, things I'm even doing now, I'm focusing on more things. I still fully 100% support a new investigation into the attacks. I absolutely do. I want to see that happen. I would love to see that be the case so we can really get justice for all the people who were killed that day and all of their friends and family. But, I have to be realistic about it, and I have to say to myself, if it doesn't seem like we're getting a new investigation, we're probably not getting a new investigation. So, that's something that I, had to come to accept, and I do accept. And I do think at this point, unless something really big happens, unless there's some real big thing that can kind of reignite that momentum in the truth movement, I just don't see how we're going to get a new investigation based on what we've currently got.
You said that researching 9/11 took a toll on you. Can you speak about that and how? Is it better now? Like, is your life better because you're not spending so much time doing this 9/11 investigation?
I don't know if I would say better. Like, I don't think my life was worse for looking into 9/11. I want to emphasize that. Like, I actually am very grateful that I got involved, the way I did. I met a lot of amazing people. I learned an enormous amount about not just 9/11, but a lot of related subjects. Like, it really, led me into looking into a lot of other like bigger world issues, which I think was a good thing for me to do. So I'll make that very clear. I don't regret at all getting involved in the truth movement. I do think it was a rewarding experience, and I felt like it was a good cause to work towards. But it's one of those things where you do it for so long, and especially if you don't see any progress getting made, it can take a toll on you. You kind of realize, there's a point where you realize, maybe I am. I don't want to say wasting time on it necessarily, but I have a lot of potential to do other things as well that I could be putting my time into. There's still a lot of big issues going on in the world, obviously. And one of the things I say in my post is that what I think people in the movement should be doing, if they're not looking into 9/11, is just trying to work towards any other cause in the world, and trying to, I think, very importantly, help to prevent the next 9/11s from happening. I really think that if we put in as much effort as was put into to kind of, make sure that these sort of attacks don't happen again. And I think to an extent, if there's any lasting impact the movement had, I like to think that, we did at least, did raise the public's awareness a little bit, that at the very least we planted more seeds in people's heads that when these kind of events happen, we should be more skeptical of it. Not to assume that like every attack is, an inside job, obviously, but just look at things with a more objective eye, like really look at both sides more objectively and not just accept everything the government says. And I think that, we did do that. I hope that is the, absent getting a new investigation, I hope that is the benefit that the movement brought the world, that, we did do some, awareness and consciousness rising and everything to kind of help people along in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think asking questions is always good. I'm not comparing you to the flat earthers, but the flat earthers are interesting in that they get people interested in science. And that it actually prompts some thought. And if people are asking questions, no matter what they're asking questions, if they're approaching it in an honest way, as there's a question, and I want to figure out what the answer is, and then you learn things, and it's good. You were very young though when you started your 9/11. You were 16 when you first kind of got into it. What effect do you think that had on how you kind of, I don't know, got into the movement? Like looking back now as an older man?
Well, I certainly wish I had gotten involved. For one thing, I wish I had gotten involved or could have gotten involved sooner than I did, because getting involved in 2007, like I said, that was kind of the point where I'd say objectively the movement kind of peaked. It would have been great to be doing stuff like prior to 2007, but, I was just too young. Like I said, I was 10 when the attacks happened, so there just was no way for me to really do that. I would love it if somehow I could go back in time and do more as I am now, because I'm certainly better informed. I have a better idea of like the evidence. A lot of theories I used to believe in when I first started out that I don't believe anymore. There's certainly things that I wish I could go back and change as far as like what I did. I don't regret how I handled it, because I really did try. And working with my friend John Michael Talbot at the Debunkers blog was really beneficial too, because he put me on kind of the right path to how to look at things more objectively and to research these topics better. Like that, like I said, that was really good in helping me weed out the good information from the bad information. And that's something that we really prided ourselves at the Debunkers blog. Like, we really tried, myself, John Michael, and the other posters who were there, we really tried to look at everything as objectively as we could and do the most responsible research that we could. And I'm happy with the work I did. I am happy with at least what I was able to do. I wish I had the funds and the team that something like a 9/11 Truth has. I'd be doing things differently if I did, but I don't have that. But just based on what I had access to, I was happy with the work that I did.
Yeah. So, what kind of stuff are you doing now? What's taken the place of 9/11 activism for you?
Honestly, nowadays I'm just kind of trying to live a normal life as much as I can. Just working. I'm working on a book currently.
Okay.
Interesting. Book on religion. I'm kind of I'm a religious skeptic, so I like to look into stuff like that nowadays. So that's kind of a project I'm focusing on now that I have more time to focus on. But yeah, I would say that not having 9/11 in my life anymore, at least not, investigating it and researching it to the extent that I did, it hasn't negatively impacted me at all. Like, I'm just trying to live a normal life for the most part. I don't feel this, need to go back to it, because I'll say that the movement is not going to stand or fall based on me. There's so many people in it that it's not going to make a difference if I'm in it or not. I'd like to contribute if I can, but I think I've pretty much done what I can do at this point. There's not much more I can do that's going to, lead us into a new investigation.
Right. All right. Well, closing out, like, if someone was, a young person was interested in 9/11 now, would you give them any advice or point them in a specific direction?
A young person, as far as like somebody maybe like my age when I got involved in the truth movement,
16-year-old.
Yeah. I would say, if that's something that you want to do, by all means. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to run your life, what to do. I would recommend not getting involved in that, at least at this stage, only because there are so many other issues that we have to deal with in the world right now. And I don't think it's, like I said, it's not going to be up to, I think, the common person to get the new investigation. I think we can certainly help, like any person, no matter who you are, the common person can make a difference in the world, absolutely. But, there's obviously people who have access to more material and has more capabilities than the average person, like the bigger groups in the truth movement. And it's really going to be up to them. And if you see them and you see that they're making the kind of progress that you think they should be making and you want to get involved, by all means. If you're like me and you look at them and think they're not really doing the work they should be doing and you think it's a lost cause, then I'd say, focus on other things. Try to do what you can in the world, but try to enjoy your life too. The only real regret I take away from it all is just knowing we won't get a new investigation. That saddens me immensely, just thinking about all the people who died that day and all the people who lost loved ones that day. That's been the biggest thing for me. The whole reason that I wanted to look into this was seeing how many problems there were and how badly this affected the people who were, most affected by that day. The family members, people who lost loved ones that day. It saddens me immensely that they're not going to get closure to this. And then that's the biggest regret I take away from it. I wish, those people could get the justice they want to see. It just seems like we're not going to get that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I see you do post things about the first responder things, like the John Stewart effort to get that, and that's great. It's a very, very real issue, regardless of what your beliefs are about what happened that day. Obviously those people were hurt, and they deserve to be taken care of, which is
absolutely.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Have you got anything else you want to talk about, or are we good?
Um, nothing to plug, I'll say. Like I said before, if people want to look at my past writings on 9/11, they can go to my old blog. That's Adam Taylor 42, the numbers 4 and 2, .blogspot.com. I've got in the sidebars all my writings about 9/11 and some other interviews I've done about 9/11. If you want to go look, if you're so inclined, by all means. Like I said, I don't post there anymore. But yeah, for the most part, I can still vouch for what I have on that site. It's just not my primary interest nowadays.
Yeah.
Just trying to live a normal life and enjoy it as much as I can.
Right. Well, thank you very much. This has been really interesting. It was a very great discussion, and I think your story is very interesting. And we disagree on quite a variety of things, I'm sure, but I think we
And
also
that's
agree.
okay.
I think we also
That's perfectly fine.
yeah, it is. It's fine to disagree if you do it in an honest way. And I think we both have the goal of removing the things that are definitely false. We just kind of disagree on where we draw the line. We both want to get rid of those no-planers, but we draw the line on other matters. All right. Well, thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Mick.